Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our paper is part of the Learning to Compete project. I did this with colleagues of mine, and one of them, Charles, actually presented a scoping paper earlier today. So what we try to do here is to look at the issue of skills and productivity, skills and productivity and its role in industrialization in Ghana. And what we did here was to look at two issues. Number one is to test the earnings education profile, something which has been talked about much earlier this afternoon. And then to go further to see if this relationship between education and productivity in the manufacturing sector of the country. So what I'm going to do is to tell you about what we found in terms of the test that we did. I'll just quickly go through how I'll present this, discuss a brief literature. I won't go too much into this. Also, brief context, that's the picture in Ghana, the empiric so far, and comments. Okay, so usually we know about this story, about the importance of human capital for firm productivity, and the fact that it's accumulated in two ways, experience and education, and lots of work have come after this, but the problem has usually been with the empirical side. So the empirical side initially pointed out to the concavity, which was referred to earlier, which is that the returns to primary education is much higher than subsequent years. But the recent evidence coming out from developing countries, in particular in Africa, shows convexity, which is that higher educational attainment is rather what generates higher benefits. And several papers have done that, just by means of showing what the typical story has been, that years of schooling, horizontal, and if you look at the earnings curve, then there should be much bigger change in terms of earnings in earlier years of schooling. However, the picture is now convex. Okay, so this is what is part of what has also prompted us to look into this for Ghana. Okay, then the second issue is on, like I said, well, if there is that convexity between education and earnings, then what about how firms sort of integrate the educational, human capital? How do firms take advantage of human capital to promote productivity? Again, there's quite enough literature pointing to how this works, but particularly interesting is the paper by Covers. It discusses the four main effects of human capital on productivity. So the worker effect, which is the positive manner productivity of labor as a result of extra education. The allocative effect, which is then the ability of the educated worker to efficiently allocate inputs of factors. And then the diffusion and research effect, which generally point at how education can stimulate new ideas and generate productivity in the firm. But there's also a bit of a challenge when you look into some of the empirical literature on this work, but mainly in developed world. There isn't much in the developing world. But what is coming out from that side is that this perhaps is not really that clear, and in the sense that education doesn't really matter. But for us, like I said earlier on, what we think about are two questions. First, is higher education important in terms of higher returns for developing countries, in this case in Ghana, sort of to help us understand the picture on industrialization in Ghana better, and then to what extent does education of the manager and the workers in the firm influence productivity. By way of a brief overview, there's been quite a number of policies in Ghana to advance the educational sector. So there's a whole range of policies which I won't go into, but what you notice a lot is that there's a lot of focus on there's been a lot of focus on primary education, perhaps also as a result of other policies coming from economic transformation or structural adjustment issues. But what is important is what we find is that the level of industrialization hasn't picked up quite much. in Ghana. It's just like it has been across. So we this question has been asked several times. Is it that the educational the education is not quite what would lead to the productivity, and which would lead to the industrialization or not? So what we try to do is to test for this in Ghana. We look at it in two ways. First, we look at the basic Minserian, the basic Minserian model, which started the whole story, and then we test this Mensa equation using the most recent Living Standard Survey, which is 2005-2006. And then we actually augment the basic Mensa with locational and dummies and try and re-estimate this across occupations to see if there are differences in what we find. And then for the productivity and education, we use the World Bank Enterprise Survey and test. We adopt the Covers model and try and extend it to see the effect there as well. So the basic Mensa equation which we test is on the, which is the earnings and education profile. And here we categorize educational attainment into four groups: persons who haven't completed primary education, those who've completed primary education, those with junior secondary, and then secondary school and higher education. Then we add other control variables. In the covers, just put here a brief, the final model that we estimate, the main derivation is in the paper, but it's a basic extended Cobb-Douglas model, and there we look at the manufacturing, the education of the manager, the training provided, average education of the workers, and skills shares as per what is in the World Bank data. Just to give a brief overview of what we find, which we think is quite interesting, across the regions, and this is a picture across the regions and at the national level. You see at the national level, average years of schooling is just about 9 years, which is up to the junior secondary level, so not much. And then about 70% of Ghanaians with education are, have up to GSS, and 24% the rest. It appears that so there's a skew towards towards basic education. It's quite clear from what we see in the data. Then we try to look at the difference between wages and across the various educational. We sort of do a permutation with the various educational sub levels that I talked about, the four groups, and to see if there are significant differences in the real wages. What we find is evidence of that convexity. In other words, as you move up the ladder, the difference in terms of wage productivity is not only bigger, but it's also more significant. In fact, between no education and primary education, there isn't, the difference there isn't significant, and well, it's actually not much. So this is the Mensa equation that we ran. The first, the base here just looks at the educational variables without any other explanation, just to test the effect of education on earnings. And what you notice there is, of course, as you move up the ladder again, the magnitude of importance of education moves up as compared to primary. If we look at it in terms of the general regression, where we slot in the other variables, experience, gender, and locational dummies, we see, again, a similar trend. And then the next, the other columns, what we do there is to re-estimate this model in terms of different sectors in the economy. So we have public sector, the private formal sector, the private informal sector, the non-farm small enterprise sector, and then the farming sub-samples. And there is still, I mean, basically we still find a general trend. So then the next thing we find the basic increasing trend, and the next thing we do is to skip this quickly, to look at the returns to education in terms of firm productivity. So here with the sample that we have, about 60% of this is now the World Bank enterprise survey, 60% sport, foreign ownership is about 7%, firms about the average age of 16, mostly small firms, but highly skewed towards small firms. In terms of results, so here again we look at the first column is more or less a basic model, and the critical issue here is what we find in terms of education of the manager being consistently significant when the manager has tertiary education. What we don't find in here is any effect from average education of workers, but perhaps also an issue of the level of education which is there, which we can't determine from the data set. And then we also don't find any information on skills. But by and large, what we find is that there's the allocative effect, which we talked about earlier, which we find in this estimation, which is that educated, well, in this case for the enterprise survey, educated managers are more able to allocate factors more efficiently. And then what is interesting for us is that these results are in line with the Minserian regression, estimation as well. So, we're finding the similar results even when we take different sort of levels of analysis. So I will skip to what we try to do here, is to try and explain this further, or try and dig into this to see what is coming out. Now, found a very interesting paper which talks about what can explain a convexity trend. One, it's a demand issue, which is falling demand for low-skilled workers. Two, could be a supply issue, which is too much primary school completers. There could be a possible weakening of the quality of primary schooling system, perhaps even as you go higher. So we try and see if these are there. Well, for Ghana, we see demand for more skilled workers, which is rising as production pattern starts shifting towards a more skilled and technology-based production. And from the policy of the free, compulsory, universal basic education and capitation grants, which sort of pushed for primary school enrollment, you could see the second issue there, which is there's a lot of supply of primary school completers, but nothing happened afterwards. And then there's also some evidence in terms of declining quality. If you look at the national assessment scores, we see slight decreases in mean competency levels. This is for primary school, 3 competency scores for English, mathematics, slight decrease from 2005 to 2007. And this is what we've come to so far, and we're looking for more comments before we continue. Thank you very much.